Hello and welcome. It's been a while since I've uploaded a video, so I want to do something today, and I want to talk about something that is very unique to the game that I am currently making. I'm currently working on an indie action rogue-lite RPG called Thrall. It's kind of a weird blend of genres, but it's a game made in RPG Maker VX, which is it's a turn-based RPG, but it utilizes a random loot system, which is very similar to the system seen in a lot of the Borderlands games, especially Borderlands 1. And I wanted to talk about that system. There's a lot of other systems that this game uses, but the random loot system is actually where this game all started. When I first started working on this game, I wanted to create a game that was honestly, I wanted to play Borderlands, but I didn't have the means to do so at the time. And so what does a game developer do when he can't play a game he wants to play? He makes the game. So I started working on a game with a random loot system, and that concept worked really well. I was actually surprised at how effective I was able to make that system work. And it turned into, okay, what if I actually put this into a full-length project? And that's where Thrall started back in February of 2023. But I want to talk about what went into making that loot system and how it actually works, because it is very unique. It's very different than anything you would typically see in an RPG Maker game. Most RPG Maker games, you've got, here, I'll open up one of my alternative projects here. So one of my earlier projects that I worked on, also in RPG Maker, was Bloodstained Hands, and it was much more of a traditional RPG that focused on a lot more of the default RPG Maker mechanics and systems. And so the way a game like this would work, and the way most RPG Maker games work, is that you have a database of weapons and armors and items. I'll just kind of wait till this boots up here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So you have a database of predetermined weapons and armors and items with their own predetermined stats. So this bronze sword always has 50 attack, minus 2 agility. It always costs 150 gold, always has 95 hit ratio, always has the same animation, the same name, the same icon. And you kind of progress through various tiers of weaponry, but the gear is always fixed. There's not really a lot of variation or changes to the weapons. And in addition to that, they are stackable. So I could have 99 of these steel greatswords. Why would you want 99? There's no reason, unless you're just trying to collect them. But most RPG Maker games, you could have 99 of every single one of these database entries, and that's how inventory is managed in most RPG Maker games. Well, the way Thrall works is there are single instance items. So if you find an item, it takes up a spot in your inventory, it is non-stackable, and you will almost never find another piece of loot exactly like that. In addition to that, you have limited inventory, where at the start of the game you can only have 10 weapons and 10 armors in your backpack, but you can upgrade it later on with some of the members that you can recruit to your keep. So that's all custom, and it all stemmed from the loot system. I'm going to talk about how that system is created and how it works and how loot is actually generated. I don't know how long this video is going to be. I'm kind of just sitting down and recording because it's been a while since I've done this, and I kind of want to get back into it. So anyway, with that, let's just jump into it. So first off, how is loot randomly generated? Well, that's because of a script that I created early on, which I actually just created in game temp. Probably not the most efficient way, but I needed an easy way to access it, and I can access this just through a simple script call into, where is it here? Game temp. So I can call a method from game temp.generate loot, and with that I can create randomly generated loot. So it was just an easy way to access it by building it into an already pre-built class. Probably not the best way of doing it, but it works, so I'm not going to complain. Now, what this does is, at the start of generate loot, there's minimum of 3, up to 4 parameters that you can pass in. I'll explain what each of those do as we get into this. But the first thing it does is it creates an empty array of all the dropped items. So if you've got, a monster that you killed and he drops 4 items, they will all be populated into this array. But it starts by creating an empty array. And then what this does here, these are all our templates. Now the templates are, these are actually database entries. These are item IDs in the database, but they're not the same as the database entries that you would see in a typical RPG Maker game. So I'll kind of show you what those look like. So if I go to weapons, at the top here I have my starting equipment for my characters, and then I've got a ton of empty slots. And then at 147, I have some predetermined weapons, and I have armors kind of structured the same way. Now, all these are templates. What is a template? Well, all the templates are in this situation is a name, an icon, an element which determines its attack pattern, and a few other things like how it affects different characters' skills. Like if a character gets plus 20% damage with swords, it's determined by its element. It also uses an element for its rarity, which determines its the color of the name as it appears in text windows, as well as the as how it gets sorted throughout inventories. It comes with an animation, hit ratio, and certain parameter changes, as well as any overdrive skills that weapon will teach, and that's it. Now, these parameter changes are not actually fixed changes, but rather percentages, and I'll explain how that works in a bit, but just as a brief little breakdown, so swords get 10% more attack than other weapons of similar quality, like other epic weapons, whereas axes get 20% more attack, but they actually have 10% less hit ratio. They have a base of 80, whereas swords have a base of 85. Sorry, 5% less. And then you get staves or blunt weapons, which have 20% more attack, the same hit ratio as a sword, but minus 10% agility or dex in this game. Spears have no bonuses, but they do get a bonus 5% hit ratio up to 90. And then daggers get 10% less attack, 10% more dex, and a critical bonus, so a plus 5% chance to its critical hit ratio. That's all the parameter changes do, and I'll show you how those actually get calculated into the final stats of an item as we go along here. But these are all just templates. None of these items, none of these database IDs ever get added to a player's inventory. These are, however, used to determine enemy weapons. So an enemy can be assigned a weapon, and it would be taken from this table. It does not get any of the bonuses from the parameter changes, but basically what it does is it gives it the icon and the animation, as well as the attack pattern. That's really all the enemy gets from it, but none of these items will ever appear in a player's inventory. Now, how does this actually work? So, these are all the templates for all the weapons, all the armors, and all the consumable items. I'm not going to go into consumable items too much. I'm mostly going to talk about the weapons and the armor, because that's where a lot of the random generation really comes in. But what happens here is when this script gets called, when loot is generated, we start by setting indexes that we iterate through. And what these are database entries that are empty or contain whether it's shop inventory or storage inventory or the player's inventory. We're setting these indexes, and then we're actually iterating through those indexes and clearing empty data. So anytime there's a weapon or an armor or an item that isn't supposed to be there, it's either it was from the chest that you opened previously, or an item that you sold before you closed the shop. What it does is it iterates through that data and it removes its name, which is how the game references that item. It doesn't reference it by its ID, but it checks to see if it has a name. If it has a name, then that item exists. If it doesn't have a name, that item doesn't exist. So this is just clearing any unused data to make room for more. And I actually have slot data here stored in a note file just to make sure I know what everything is. And so this actually took a little bit of creativity in the sense of rethinking how database entries actually work. Instead of thinking of this here as an item that you can have 99 of in your inventory, I instead thought of each of these database entries as a slot in your inventory. and thinking, okay, this is the 5th item in your inventory, this is the 6th item in your inventory, and instead of taking an item from the database, I would copy the entry from the database into this slot, and then that would stay there. That would basically be the way of showing that this is in that player's inventory, is that it is in this slot. So every single one of these database entries is a inventory slot or a slot in a shop or storage, and I have that listed here. So for weapons, slots 1 to 36 are the backpack and your equipped items. Slots 37 to 76 are everything that can drop from chests or monsters, including things that you could then, say a loot table opens up, you can then take things from your backpack and put it into those slots to discard them. Storage is everything from 77 to 106. The 107 to 146 is the shops. And then there's templates, elements, which that's a little bit more nuanced. The locker, that one's actually changed. That's a bit outdated. I've got some that are specifically just for enemy attacks for animations that don't have icons, and then a couple of other templates. And every individual database for both armors and items have that same kind of similar setup for the slot data. Now, how does this actually work? So once we've cleared that junk data, what we then do is we loop through this for the number of times of iterations that we've passed through at the start of this. So every time we generate loot, we set the number of items that we want to actually generate, and that's our iterations. And so we iterate through this as many times as we've set in the beginning. We set the max level of the loot, so if it's greater than 99, we make sure that the loot never generates over level 99, because the player needs to be able to equip it, and level 99 is the max player level. And then we actually have the option to force what type of loot gets dropped. Now, this is useful in a couple of situations. So if you're entering, we can actually pass in a variable into this method called force type, which then just allows us to set it to whatever we want right then and there. So say we have a mission where the reward is a special weapon. Well, then we would want to force the loot that gets generated to be a weapon. So we can do that by setting force type to the value that would generate a weapon. If we have a game variable set to a certain value, we would open up a shop. So we would set type to 2, so it only generates weapons. We would set type to 3 if we want it to only generate armors, or we'd set it to 1 if it's an item shop. However, if we haven't set a force type and we are not currently in a shop as determined by this variable, then what we would do is we would randomly generate a number between 1 and 5. And what that would do is if it generates a 1, it would generate an item. If it generates a 2 or a 4, it would generate a weapon. And if it generates a 3 or a 5, it would create armors. And the reason for this is because chests and enemies will randomly drop a certain type of loot, but items actually have their own specific loot source, which are these little red bags that get scattered around certain dungeons. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show. My computer's probably going to freeze if I do this. Yeah, great. Okay, I'll just let that load for a bit. But there's these little red item bags, and what they do is you can interact with them and get one single consumable item. So because of that, you will find many more consumable items throughout dungeons than you will weapons and armors. And so I wanted to limit how many consumable items are found in chests and enemy drops without completely eliminating them. So by generating a number between 1 to 5, and having 2 of them generate weapons, 2 of them armors, and 1 items, you have a 40% chance every time you open a chest or defeat an enemy that drops loot of that item being a weapon. You have a 40% chance of it being an armor, and then you only have a 20% chance that it's a consumable item. So that's what that random number is for. God, my computer is slow right now. There we go. Okay, so if I just go into one of these maps here. Holy smokes, come on now. There we go. Okay, that's not an item. That's not an item. That's an item. Okay. That's all I wanted to show you, is that I have a tiny little red item bag here that generates a single consumable item. That's all I wanted to do. Why did that take so long? Anyway, so when we're generating an item, we can either force the type or randomly select the type. And then what we would do is we would actually set the drop rate, and we can adjust the drop rate actually with an in-game variable. Now, the lower the number, the better the quality of loot. The highest range that you can generate is a random number between 0 and 1,000,000, but you only get legendary items when the number generated is 90 or below. So if you're generating loot, the less numbers you have, the narrower your range, the more likely it is that you'll find better loot. So if you're generating a number between 0 and 1,000,000, your chance of getting a legendary is a lot less than if you were to generate a number between 0 and 100,000. So this variable allows us to narrow that range in-game. So say we're facing a certain boss and we want to narrow that range. We would just increase this variable by the amount of numbers we want to eliminate from that range, and it would then adjust the drop rate. Now, once we've determined what type of loot we're going to drop, we've set the max level, we've set the minimum drop rate, or the maximum I should say, when we've cleared all that junk data, what we then do is we actually generate the loot based on whatever type we've set before. So up here is where we've set the type. This is where we actually generate it. I'm going to skip through items because that's a little bit different, and we're going to go straight to weapons. So when we generate a weapon, first thing we would do is we want to determine the rarity. Now, I have a couple different ways of fixing the rarity. I can do that either through a game switch or a variable. Those are used in different situations. But what this would do is that, let's say I have a mission reward where I want to drop a blue rarity weapon. Well, if I normally just generated loot with by generating a number between 0 and 9,000, I'd only have a 90% chance of that being a blue weapon, because anything from 900 and below would be either purple rarity or higher. So to fix the rarity, I have these here. It checks to see if these are set to the correct parameters, and if it is, it sets the drop chance to the drop rate that I've inputted in the first place. If those are not set, though, then it sets the drop chance to a random number between 0 and the drop rate that I've input. And then once the drop rate has been determined, once the drop chance has been determined, I should say, that determines the rarity of the item, and it then will check to see what the drop chance is if we have iterated outside of the area that we were supposed to. So if we generated more loot than we were supposed to, and it would extend outside of those database entries that we're trying to fill, we check to make sure that we're not outside of those bounds. And in the case of certain weapons, there are level requirements before they can generate. I'm not going to talk about that right now, so let's just jump down here. But yeah, if the drop chance is set to a certain value, and we are still within the bounds of the database entries that we want to overwrite, that's when it will generate the loot. So for generating a legendary weapon, first thing it's going to do is it's going to take a source. Now the source is that template that I talked about in the first place. So this here references that array of templates of item IDs in the database, and it's going to select a random one, and it will take the data from the database for that and assign it to this temporary variable source. We are then going to take a temporary variable drop, and we're going to assign it to the database entry that we are overwriting, whether it's in the chest or the shop or inventory, whatever it is. We're overwriting the new database entry we're basically assigning a variable to it. Then what we're going to do is we're actually going to generate the stats. So we'll start by generating the attack on this legendary weapon. First thing we would do is take the level of the weapon, which level is inputted same time when you generate the loot. That's one of the parameters you pass in. What is the level of the loot that you're generating? And it adds a little bit of variety to that, but we're basically taking the level, we're multiplying it between a random number that the range of that can change based on the quality. We're also adding a little bit more range based on its level, so basically it takes let's say you're dropping a level 50 piece of loot. It would take a random number between 0 and 49, technically, and subtract it by half of that level. So let's say it generated 49. Half of 50 is 25, so 49 minus 25 would be 24. So it would add 24 to the attack. And in that way, you kind of have a little bit of variance in the type of the weapon, in the attack stat of the weapon that gets dropped. Then it actually takes the source. So that database entry that we talked about before, that template, let's say it was a sword. Well, swords get plus 10% attack. So this here would increase the attack of the dropped weapon by a percentage determined by the source weapon. So it increased swords by 10%, for example. It then adds a few more calculations just to add a little bit more range to it, a little bit more variance. It sets the minimum to 1 so that you can never have a weapon that drops with 0 attack. That's very important because there are certain situations where it could divide by 0 if you don't do that. And then it does the same thing for agility, but with some slightly different calculations. The hit is the same kind of thing. It takes the source weapon, the template, and adds a little bit of variance, about basically a plus or minus 5%, plus or minus 10%, I think, actually. It takes the template's icon and copies it into that database entry. Now this is actually how I did the level requirement, is the description of the item, because descriptions don't exist in this game in the same way. There's no help window that actually shows the description of the weapon. So what I did was I used that text box as a way to set a level requirement. And what I did was I took the level of the loot that gets generated, converted it to a string, and then made that the description of the weapon. Then when I'm checking to see if a player can equip it, I take that description, convert it back to an integer, and compare it to the level of the player that's trying to equip that weapon. This is all really technical, and it's probably really boring to a lot of you, but I hope that it's at least just a little bit interesting, because I put a lot of work into this, and I'm really happy about it, so I just wanted to talk about it and share it. And then it just copies other things like the critical hit bonus. It sets fast attack to 0 or to false because that is a specific accessory. It copies the element set, copies the state set, copies the note. Then it generates a prefix. Now, I will talk about that right away here. But after it generates the prefix, it will then set the animation to the template. It only does this after the prefix for legendary weapons, though. For every other weapon, it actually takes the animation before generating the prefix. And I will explain why when I get into talking about the prefixes. And then it takes the price, and how it generates a price for this item is it takes the attack plus the agility multiplied by a value to determine, based on its rarity, basically. So legendaries take the attack plus agility times 80, epic is times 40, rare is times 20, etc., etc. And then what it does is it takes that weapon and it pushes it into that drop item array that we created at the very, very start of this method and increases the index of the database entries that we are then overwriting. And that's basically how loot gets generated. Now, what is this prefix thing? I will talk about that. Armor is pretty much the same way, but it's different stats and et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of actually the same code, but it's just the calculations are changed based on the quality of the loot. But and then it returns the drop item array, which is then displayed in a custom loot table that I created as well. Now, what is this prefix thing? So, when you generate a piece of loot with a prefix, what you do is it takes the item that you're generating a prefix on, the template, and another value, which is its rarity. Yes. And what it does is down in this method here. So the way that loot works in this game, or at least the way it's explained in-game, is that weapons have different components. So every weapon that generates with a prefix, which is anything green rarity or better, basically what it does, green weapons get 1 component, rare weapons get 2, and then epic and legendary weapons get 3 components. Now, the components come in 3 different categories. There's the material component, which just affects the stats of the item. And in the case of weapons, you can have multiple materials on one weapon, and you can have multiple of the same material. So you can have plus 15 attack 3 times on the same weapon, giving it plus 45% attack stat. There's also element components, which are pretty self-explanatory, and then there's accessory components. Elements and accessories, weapons and armors can only ever have 1 of each. And accessories change the way that the weapon works. So, for example, a fast accessory means that it gets that fast attack thing that we disabled earlier, which basically just gives the person first turn priority at the start of a battle. You can get a crit damage accessory, which actually increases the amount of damage your critical hits deal by 1 modifier. So instead of ×3, you deal ×4 damage. And there's a couple other accessories. I'm not going to go into too much detail with that. But what that does, how that works, is it takes the dropped item that we've just generated, it takes the template, and it takes the rarity, and it establishes this entire list of prefixes based on rarity. So these are uncommon weapon prefixes, rare weapon prefixes, rare elemental prefixes, which that's important for more unique stuff, epic weapon prefixes, a couple other things here. These are all duplicates of epic weapon prefixes, but they are specific to elements or accessories. And then there's also, I think, legendary. Oh no, yep, because legendary and epic get the same prefixes. So epic weapon prefix is the highest one you need there. So this is a full list of prefixes for this game. It took, I think, almost a solid week to actually come up with all the names and make sure I didn't have any duplicates. But yeah, there's a lot here. Now, first thing it does, it checks to see if the weapon that we've generated is a weapon or an armor. If it's a weapon, it checks the rarity, and it generates a prefix based on the array containing those specific prefixes. So if you've generated a weapon with a rarity of 1, that means it's uncommon. It would set the prefix to a random uncommon weapon prefix. If it's 2, there are some things that it needs to check to see for unique weapons, but if you basically don't have, if you're not going with a specific custom unique drop, then it would just generate a random rare weapon prefix. And then same thing for epic. It checks to see if the weapon that is dropped is custom and unique, and if not, then it just generates an epic weapon prefix. And what those do is we will then actually go through a variety of kind of case when situations where it checks the prefix, and if it is any of these, then that means that it has a damage bonus material. So it increases the attack of the weapon. If it's got any of these, then it's actually got 2 of those damage materials, so it increases it by 30%. And if it's got 1, then that means, if it's got this 1 prefix here, that means it's got all 3 weapon materials, and it increases the attack by 45%. And then it does that, again, for dex, for accuracy, for... it doesn't actually do that with critical hits, because critical hits are determined in a separate method. But then it also checks to see, okay, does it have an element? If it's got any of these prefixes, then it's a fire weapon. So it's going to take the element set of the dropped weapon, and it's going to add... Oh no, what did I do? No, we're good. It's going to take that element set and add to it the element set of a separate database entry that is just used to assign the fire element to those weapons. It also does the same thing for the applied states, so fire weapons would inflict burn status on hit. It then checks to see what the attack pattern of the weapon is. Is it a sword, an axe, a mace, a spear, or a knife? And it changes the animation ID of the dropped weapon based on that element. So if it's a sword, it would give it the fire sword animation. If it's a mace, it would give it the fire mace animation, etc., etc. And then it does the same thing to check to see if it's an ice weapon or a shock weapon or a weak weapon. And then, once again, it does the same thing for accessories. Now, accessories are a little bit different. Some of them use notes to check to make sure if the weapon has that particular accessory. Some of them use built-in features like the fast attack. Some of them actually just have an entire new element that gives it some different functionality. And then it basically does the same thing for armors. It checks its defense, resistance, evasion, elements, and accessories. And then it returns that drop back up to the array that back up to the method that we had before. And that is how it gets the prefix. So with that, you have weapons that have hundreds of templates, and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of different stat combinations that could be generated based on the level, based on a variety of different random rolls. And the prefixes make it so that they have additional modifications that make them even more complex. There are literally hundreds of millions of different types of weapons and armors that can generate from this script. Now, once that's all been generated, everything else falls under... Did my computer freeze? There we go. Once that's all been generated, that gets output into a loot table. So basically all that does... My God, my computer is slow. Basically all that does is it creates an array of weapons that can be accessed pretty much at any time through the game temp class. And then the loot table actually will spit those weapons out into a custom table. And essentially this is where it actually... this is where it would copy the information from, say, the loot table that shows chests and shops, and copy that and put it into the database entries that fill your backpack. And that's where you'd actually add it to the player's inventory and remove it from the player's inventory. I have different ways of checking to see whether or not you're in a storage chest, in the locker, in a shop, or just in a loot table. There's different ways of sorting, so you can either sort by rarity or by type. You can compare loot. The loot table on its own is its own little beast. Oh, I shouldn't have saved that. I may have moved some things around by accident. It should be fine. I don't think I accidentally broke anything. But yeah, the loot table is its own little beast on its own. That was a long script to create, and one that I didn't do all at once. I've been making modifications to it and updates to it for the last, I don't even know how long, since I started this project, really. What is going on? Holy smokes, my computer is not happy today. It's not normally this slow. I don't know if it's OBS Studio or what's going on, but I'm... Patience is a virtue. Something's wrong here, though. I don't know what's going on. Oh, there we go. I think. Give it a minute. I am full screen. Oh my God. Come on now. I'm just going to kind of demonstrate what the loot table actually does, just to kind of show you this. There. Oh. Wow, this is slow. Okay, let me try this. Let's go into one of my files. This shouldn't be this slow. I don't know why it's this slow. This is why I didn't change my... This is why I didn't change my video format. I was thinking of trying with a different type of setup for my videos and trying a different recording format, and I didn't do it because my computer is a potato and does not like this. Okay, so here's an example here. This little item bag, if I open this, it will set the force type variable to make it so that only consumable items are generated, and it will only generate one. So when I open this, I get one consumable item. Whereas this chest... No, go away. My computer is lagging so much that I couldn't even dodge this one little random encounter. That makes me a little irritated. Holy smokes. Please stop. Just... Oh. This was supposed to be a nice, smooth example of the loot table. Anyway, okay, so if I open this chest, this is a common rarity chest, so it should generate up to 3 pieces of loot of white rarity or better. So if I open it, It only generated one. I got some really bad rolls there. And so this loot table was all custom as well. So I can change categories in my backpack to show my weapons, my items, or my armors. I can press the comparison button to show how it compares to my equipped items. And basically all it does is it shows at the bottom there's the icon, the name, its damage, dex, accuracy, crit, its level, and its sell value. Let's see if I'm gonna debug, because I don't need to play by the rules, I'm the developer. I want to see if I can find something with a better rarity though, so that I can show you what weapons with prefixes look like. I guess I actually don't even need to... Yeah, I can cheat to make chests appear too, because I know how that works. Oh, there, doesn't matter. Here's one here. Okay, so this chest here, it's got like a gold trim to it. This is a rare quality chest, so it can generate, I think as well, up to 3 pieces of loot. Most of them should be uncommon rarity or better, and one has a really good chance of being blue rarity or better. So if we open that. Okay, so this is technically a blue rarity item. No, that's uncommon. Yeah, so I didn't get some great drops from this, but I did get one with a prefix. So this Swift Club took that club template from the uncommon weapon templates, randomly generated some stats, and then generated a Swift prefix, which gives it a slight dex bonus over weapons of similar quality. Now, because it's a blunt weapon, blunt weapons typically generate with less dex anyway. Okay, I'm going to cheat to make these chests better quality, so we can get a better example here. There we go. Let's make... Yeah, there we go. There we go. And I got some, armors with some good prefixes here. So I got a grounded circlet. This is basically that circlet template from the uncommon armors, copied over into a separate database entry, got randomly generated defense, resistance, and evasion based on it being level 6. It then determined a sell value of 36, and then it generated a prefix. The prefix it decided to generate was grounded, and what that did was give it a shock resistance component, so it's now a shock element armor. Lucky Robes, same kind of thing. Takes that robe template from the uncommon armors, copies it over, randomly generates its stats, and then it generated the prefix of Lucky, which gives it a half crit accessory, which means that the ally that equips this armor will get hit by critical hits from enemies half as much. And let's see if we can get a good weapon. Do I have a golden key? No, I don't. Okay. Yeah, no good weapons, but there's a blue rarity armor, same kind of thing. Takes that armor template from the database entries where they're predetermined, copies it into a fresh, empty database entry, randomly generates stats, and it gave it the bonus HP accessory, so it gives the person who equips it a little bit of bonus HP. So for example, Mel in the middle there has 330 HP, but if I equip her with this armor, she should get 15% extra, which bumps her up to 378. So yeah. And that's essentially how random loot is generated in Thrall. Oh, please don't break on me. There we go. Oh, that was painful. I'm still playtesting apparently, even though I'm not. There we go. Oh, that was painful. Okay. But yeah, that's how random loot is generated in Thrall. Basically all it was figuring out that I can have an entire database entry represent an inventory slot, and then figuring out ways to copy other inventory slots into those and change their stats, which make them random. And then just finding creative ways of making them more interesting and more diverse. There is something I had to do, though, which is that when the person saves and loads their game, normally it loads the database from the data file. Oh, come on. There we go. It loads the database from this data folder here. I think it's at the bottom. Weapons.rv data. It takes that and then populates the database with everything from that file. What that does, though, is that if you've found random loot and overwritten some of these and now have those in your inventory and are using them, if you save and reload the file, you're going to have the default. This would basically be your inventory. It's going to wipe clean everything. So I actually had to, in the file scene of the game, make it so that not only does it save things like character data and map data, but it also actually saves the weapon and armor and item data to the save file itself. This here doesn't normally exist. I added those to make it so that weapon, armor, and item data is actually saved to the save file instead of just loading it from the from the database. So yeah, that's basically it. There's more to it, but I think that's enough. We don't need to go into detail about every single tiny little thing. But I guess this is just to kind of show you that you can do anything you want with an RPG Maker game as long as you're creative enough and willing to think outside the box. This kind of loot system would normally not be possible unless you can find ways to get creative with how RPG Maker structures its data. So with that, I'm just going to leave it at that there. That's it for today. Yeah. Sorry I haven't uploaded in a while. It's been a long month so far. I'm going to try to be more consistent moving forward, but I'm probably also not going to release some of the videos that I initially said that I would. I'm trying to keep this as a hobby. I'm trying to stay passionate about this and not just... Yeah, I'm trying not to stress over this too much. This YouTube channel is just a hobby. I'm not trying to go pro with it or anything, as you can tell. So yeah, with that, hope this was entertaining or educational in some way, and I will see you next time.